Just to make a jump into neoliberal Friedmanian global economics, do you see that self-imploding because it's a non-viable, non-sustainable form of economics, or do you see the co-op movement being on the flank of that to help bring that IMF neocon structure?
Well, my take on the market economy is very simple. I'm in favour of the market. I think any monopoly is a bad thing. A co-op monopoly would be just as corrupt and bad as a Stalinist monopoly, or is just as corrupt and bad as a monopoly run by an entrepreneur. What we really need is pluralism. We don't need a single model in the market, but we need the pluralism will enable the market to function, not optimally, because this is the real world, but function better. Let's put it like that, fairer. And I see the co-ops and cooperative ideals as being something that can operate across a wide range from within the domestic economy into the social economy, right across into the what I'd call the for-profit money economy, without necessarily giving up on any of its principles or ideals, but just operating within a different milieu and enabling the markets to be regulated. You see, if we use cooperative values and principles at the moment at the bottom of the global labour market, where people are in the most poverty-stricken and most marginalised situations, the truth of the matter is that throughout Africa, many people, if they had a little bit of cooperative development, would probably have a better life out of the labour market and out of the money economy altogether. And if you could just take that slither at the bottom of the labour market out, you start to improve the lot for the rest, because you reduce the level of competition within the labour market. If then you act at another point in the labour market, and where among industrial labour you start to get trade unions in collecting money, creating employment, buying shares in the companies, but also putting up money to make redundant people, technologically displaced people into employment again, we can make another intervention there. And then in the main economy, we can be like in banking and financial services. The movement actually competes there with the private sector. And the co-op bankers in London and has demonstrated, I think, that even when you're a small player, if you're a cooperative, and you don't have to therefore have transferable shares, therefore you don't have to have the same rate of profit. You have to make profit. I mean, see my lips on this, you must make profit, but they don't have to make the huge profits. Globalization, you see, is a tremendous opportunity for the cooperative movement, because capital is so mobile. And so every chief executive of any share-based business has got to look over their shoulder and say, hey, I've got to make this rate of profit. But if you're a co-op, you don't have to make that rate of profit, not that much profit. Therefore, you can turn around and say, we can reflect a better offer. We can provide for the social values and the services and still meet the price and the quality of the products. So you get a cooperative bank turning around saying, well, we don't invest in the arms trade. No other bank can do that, because they must, because it's so profitable. Their portfolio requires it, but we don't. So we have I think we have a competitive advantage, actually. But we need to have the right kind of management. We need the right kind of vision, and people with the right kind of values, and that's unfortunately a lot of ifs.
Ideologically, sorry Joe,
No, go ahead.
Ideologically, how do you fight the consolidated media? Because the media are the accordion putting out the neoliberal ideals.
Yeah, I agree.
So how do you fight that? How do you fight, you go home,
well, look,
get the family?
if I had all the answers to these big questions, I don't think I'd be sitting here. My own view is that we have to look at the existing institutions and we have to convince them. And there are institutions, very big institutions, that mobilize millions of people that could be convinced. And we need to think of it. I mean, I'm a Roman Catholic myself, and I look at the Roman Catholic Church, 1.3 billion people. It's got Catholic social doctrine. It's just about as left-wing as you can get. They never talk about it. In 14 years of being a Roman Catholic, I've yet to hear a priest mention Catholic social doctrine, and yet that was the reason I became a Catholic, basically. One of the important reasons.
Liberation theology, though, was very prominent.
Well, I think liberation theology was a bit of a side, myself, a bit of a kind of cul-de-sac, really. I mean, quite frankly, the teachings of Jesus and St. Paul are as radical as it comes. And even popes that were considered anti-communist, like the last one, Pope John Paul, actually his social encyclicals were very radical. Very radical. I mean, he just, he challenged the whole concept of private ownership. He said, well, church is in favour of people having the right to own their own property, but, he said, you cannot use private ownership as a mechanism for preventing people living. And if they've got nothing, then they're entitled to have something that you've got. And you can't stop that. You shouldn't stop that. I mean, it was almost anarchic, really, almost anarchist. I mean, very radical. So, and I think that, the religious movements in the world need to be challenged to actually enter into the social domain, not just simply by not simply by charitable works, but by actually looking at the social mechanisms. And to some extent, the church has done that because it does found a lot of. I mean, lots of credit unions are founded by the Catholic Church.
But what about? I mean, what are the problems of the fundamentalist Christian movement around the world? I mean, they're the ones that are, For a long time, people were complaining they didn't get involved in politics. Now they are, and look at the sort of things.
Yeah,
well, I think I must say, when I was my very first visit to the American continent, I came across these people, and I wrote my first fumbling attempts at social theology because I was so cross to see them quoting St. Paul with all these reactionary ideas, and so I wrote a little pamphlet called St. Paul, Cooperation. And cooperation, St. Paul and cooperation, and just to show that actually there was a very radical reading of St. Paul, not just a reactionary one. Obviously, we the whole history of the cooperative movement, and the church is no different. It's an association, it's a membership-based organisation, and of course you have altruism. You have reactionary ideas in the Catholic Church and reactionary strands in the Catholic and the reactionary strands in the Protestant Church. On the other hand, don't forget that the Pilgrim Fathers and the diggers and the levelers were also Protestants. I mean, and they were, you don't get more left wing than a digger and a leveler. In the trade union movement, in the labour movement, in the cooperative movement, and in the church, all social movements, these are contested terrains. It's not that we have an organised labour movement here and an enemy over there called capitalism. We have an enemy right in our midst that's on the right. And therefore we have an ideological struggle going on within the movements that are actually trying to liberate people, and that's a continuing process. And it's a complex one, where we don't have the resources what we should have, what we need.
But I wanted to ask you about getting the resources, because I think that was a great idea what you wrote in your dissertation. How have you presented that to the ICA, getting all the co-ops in the world to?
I've published it in the ICA review. I've published it in the Journal of Social Economics from University of Exeter. I had a big book which was based on it, published by a little Greek university which sank without trace. It was published in Greek and English, and I've recently had another go at it. It just doesn't seem to have any resonance. Nobody takes the ideas. I mean, I challenge people. I say, you just show me where I'm wrong. I mean, when I did my analysis, I'm not a mathematician actually, and in fact I'm pretty innumerate really, and I did all my number crunching, but it was all kind of arithmetic. It wasn't sort of sophisticated econometrics. And when I went for to defend my thesis, I discovered that Professor Francis Green was one of the examiners, and I thought, well, I'll be very smart here, go look at his PhD, which was at the London School of Economics, and I went down and saw it. Now mine's a great sort of literary tome, this big. His was like this, thin. And I opened it up, and to my nightmare, it was just wall-to-wall formulas, most of which I just didn't know where he was coming from. I could understand the first page, and I could understand the conclusions, but everything in between, forget it. I thought, this man is going to tear me to pieces on this. He's not going to like this at all. But I was very pleasantly surprised, and he didn't say anything about the mathematics or anything about my numbers. And in the end, towards the end, I just had to ask him. I said, what did you think about the numbers? He said, they're fine. He said, nothing wrong with those. So that's one of the leading econometricians in the country at the time. He was a professor of economics at Leeds, and he's read my PhD. He saw those numbers. He's seen that, and he said it worked. It was okay. Nothing wrong with it.
What do you think is preventing people from moving in this area? It's just
blinkers, and the fact that we aren't led by people who are really looking for solutions. We're led by people who are trying to maintain their own positions. And when I was in the trade union movement, I found myself being attacked on all sides for coming up with a strategy for the union to deal with the contemporary situation in distribution in England. This is in 1970s, when I was a trade union official, and you know, I mean, I was trying to get the managers in shops organised. That's what I was basically trying to do, because I discovered and realised when I was in South Wales that wherever you had a manager in the shop, you had everybody in the shop. And with extended trading hours, it was obvious that the managers were the ones who were going to lose out most, because you could give, you know, women working part-time anyway, you know, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, so extended trading hours, it wasn't an issue for them. But if you were the manager or the deputy manager had to be there, because otherwise the staff would steal. So their working conditions were going to go down the drain. So managers were opposed to it, and here we had an opportunity in the union to go and say, we will, you know, you join the union, we will fight extended trading hours. The right wing accused me of being a Marxist because they wanted cosy relations, and to be fair to them, that was probably a more accurate assessment anyway. I mean, not that I am a Marxist, I wouldn't be a Roman Catholic if I was a Marxist, but I'm not saying that Marx was wrong about everything, far from it. And but I was attacked by the right. But then, what about the left? You know, the Trotskyites and all the, and even my own, you know, friends, I thought, in the Communist Party and other people that are on the broad left of the Labour movement, they all attacked me. They called me a managerialist, as you're trying to train to union. You know, we're about workers, not managers, you know. I mean, it was just so pathetic. But really, they were all adopting positions to try and justify themselves. They weren't looking at facts and looking strategically at what was really going to help the shop worker. You know, my strategy wasn't to turn Asda into a managerial union. It was to get the managers on our side for the benefit of everybody.
I guess when everyone's against you, that's when you know you're right.
Well, you know, I had to leave the union movement. I just couldn't. I thought, if I stay, I'm just going to get a bitter, twisted old geezer. And I saw plenty of those around me among my business. I thought, I'm not letting that happen, you know. I got to go. So I went.